Hey, is there a better combo than barbecue and whiskey? BBQ and Barrels is back at Nationals Park on September 19th. This is the third annual celebration. It features unlimited pours from over 100 premium bottles: Buffalo Trace, Jack Daniels, Bardstown Bourbon, Catoctin Creek, and so much more. Enjoy delicious barbecue from local favorites, groove to live music, and bring home some great whiskey. BBQ and Barrels, September 19th at Nationals Park, where great whiskey meets incredible barbecue. Tickets are going quickly and are available at nats.com/bbqbarrels. Hey, so with all the craziness in DC, taking time to connect with your neighbors just feels good. So don't miss District Bridge's Art All Night, DC's biggest arts festival. It celebrates creativity, culture, and community, and it's returning September 12th and 13th across all 8 wards. You can find celebrations by District Bridges in Mount Pleasant, Cleveland Park, Lower Georgia Avenue, Logan Circle, and U Street. Dance to local bands and support local artists in your favorite neighborhood restaurants and outdoor spaces. It's way more important than ever to show our local business owners and artists that we see them and we support them. See the full lineup at districtbridges.org/artallnight. Today on CityCast DC, we are currently living through the biggest threat to DC's home rule since the Home Rule Act was passed 50 plus years ago. And it's got people talking again about how DC's weird legal status in a lot of people's minds just doesn't work. Everyone knows about the push for statehood, but the current crisis got me thinking about a question we asked a few months ago. Should DC rejoin Maryland? That's actually a thing. It's called retrocession. It's the once-taboo idea that instead of becoming the 51st state, Washington should simply join Maryland. For years, David Krucoff has been the lonely champion of this cause. He joined CityCast earlier this year to explain why he thinks it's the best way forward. I wanted to revisit this episode now because a lot of people are thinking about solutions that will keep crises like last week's from happening again. Even though this was recorded before Donald Trump's takeover of local DC, these are questions that experts have been wondering about and warning us about for a long time. Today is Monday, September 8th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, David.
Hi there.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
So on our pod, Maryland Representative Jamie Raskin, who's a longtime D.C. statehood advocate, mentioned that actually maybe D.C. should temporarily retrocede into Maryland instead. Here's what he said.
I saw Mayor Bowser and I said, if you guys want to think about coming back to Maryland for this period, you will definitely be safer in the Free State than you'll be under the brutal thumb of MAGA colonialism, But anyway, she took it under advisement. I think, it's a reasonable position to say that people will stick it out through this brutal period and, live to fight another day for DC statehood. But there's obviously nothing moving on that with the Republicans in control of the House, the Senate, and the White House.
You are a proponent of retrocession. You were pro-retrocession before it was cool. What is retrocession for folks who don't know?
Retrocession is the falling back of DC or a portion of DC into the state from which it was ceded. DC was ceded from Virginia and from Maryland because of the Resident Act. And then when the Virginia side fell back, it retroceded.
I see. And that's what we now call Arlington and Alexandria.
Yeah, it was all Alexandria at the time.
And then in your idea, DC would be another county or another city of Maryland, the 24th.
So people I worked with said, why don't we call it Douglas County, Maryland? And I said, that's it. And I decided to market that idea. So yeah, Douglas County, Maryland, or Douglas City, Maryland. Obviously, it's named after Frederick Douglass, who was born in the state of Maryland, but became a free citizen but lost his free citizenship in the District of Columbia, but not by nature of his color, but by nature of his residency in DC.
So what would be the geographic boundaries of this extra county/city of Maryland?
The geographic boundaries would be the same geographic boundaries that we would have if we were the 51st state. So the monumental core, starting, let's say, at the Lincoln Memorial, and then let's go down Independence Avenue, around the Supreme Court, and around the Capitol, that is, too, and then going up the south side of Pennsylvania Avenue, and carving out the hotel, which is at, I think it's at 12th at Pennsylvania, because somebody could live there. So you got to carve that out. And you'd carve out the John Wilson building. And then you go up 15th Street to Pennsylvania Avenue in front of the White House, and you go to 17th Street. And then you go down 17th Street into Constitution, and then back to the Lincoln Memorial.
So basically, the feds keep them all, and the rest of the city, either becomes a state or joins Maryland, because the Constitution says the federal government needs its own space.
Correct.
So you've been advocating for this for years, and for the most part, most of the DC rights diehards have been content to ignore you and this. Axios DC conducted an informal poll recently that said 82% of their readers prefer the district rejoin Maryland rather than being taken over by President Trump. So this seems like the chaos of the moment is getting to people. And I think this is the chaos you've been warning about this whole time.
Yeah, well, I just want our democracy to be effective, and I want to be part of our democracy fairly. And it's obvious to me that a second retrocession is the path forward.
So how would this work? Do Maryland and DC just come together and shake on it?
Let's follow what happened in the 1840s. The Virginia Washingtonians asked Congress and their representatives to create a bill that would have the Alexandria portion of the District of Columbia fall back into the state of Virginia. And Congress listened after many years of back and forth about it, and they did it. And they then passed an initiative in Alexandria and in Alexandria County that accepted that condition. And the governor and the House of Delegates supported it. Polk signed it. And these referendums happened in Virginia, and it became effective in 1847.
So this just requires an act of Congress. It's not a constitutional amendment.
No, it does not. Well, there are people that think that the first retrocession was not constitutional. And I would invite them to find somebody in Arlington, Virginia, to sue and then fail in that lawsuit.
You ran for DC Council a couple years ago as a Republican. I'm curious if this is a thing that you have talked about or tried to sell to Republicans, either in Maryland or sort of at the national level.
Both.
And how'd that go?
I mean, fine. You have to understand that the way that these hearings on the Hill work is that the rules don't accommodate the minority. So let's say Democrats are in the majority and they want to get a 51st statehood bill moving and they want to have a hearing. And then the Republicans are afforded one witness. So the Republicans are going to choose their most maximalist position, which is that 51st statehood is unconstitutional. And sure, will the conversation a little bit branch into retrocession? It will, because it can't avoid it, but it really won't focus on it.
They were perfectly happy to entertain that conversation when they were actually afraid that Congress might go and make DC the 51st state.
But when I walked around to all the House offices and asked them to be their witness, as opposed to Roger Pilon from the Cato Institute, and I was not accepted because, I mean, I got interviews with House people, and I've spoke to politicians in the state of Maryland about it and had Zoom calls, for example. But, this is behind the scenes type of stuff. So yeah, people are very receptive. There are open retrocessionists within the Republican congressional bodies presently.
Do you have other evidence that DC residents actually want this? Because there's a lot of years when nobody in the sort of DC defender community was on your side.
Well, the DC defender community, as you call it, likes to get reelected. And they use the advocacy for 51st statehood exclusively as a means to perpetuate their incumbency.
If it is successfully perpetuating their incumbency, that would suggest that the general public shares those views.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Is retrocession less popular than the 51st statehood? Yeah, I agree. But, we got to recall something here. This is a national thing. We're not the only deciders here. The last time a state was partitioned it required a civil war. So for West Virginia to fall out of the state of Virginia, that required a war between the states. One could argue that creating Douglas Commonwealth is a partitioning of the state of Maryland.
So, David, your view, though, is not just that this is sort of the second best option after 51st statehood. You think it's actually better than statehood, that being part of Maryland would have big pluses that being an independent state would not.
In my opinion, both are statehood.
Mm-hmm.
So if you live in Arlington, do you have statehood? The answer I would say is yes.
Understood. But your view has been, I think, that D.C. being part of Maryland is superior to D.C. being its own state.
Economically, historically, and for democracy, yeah, all three of those.
CityCast DC is made possible by the Peabody Institute of the Johns Hopkins University, presenting the Peabody Performance Series, a full season of free concerts at the Johns Hopkins University Bloomberg Center located at 555 Pennsylvania Avenue, Washington, D.C. The Peabody Performance Series brings one of the nation's leading conservatories to the heart of D.C. with concerts and programs spanning jazz, classical, chamber music, opera, and dance. Highlights this season include the Graduate Jazz Ensemble on October 31st, and in January, the Nexus Grant, featuring 2 masterclasses and a reception with internationally renowned conductor Marin Alsop and the National Philharmonic. While all events are free, tickets are required for entry. Explore the full performance schedule, find out more details, and reserve your tickets early at washingtondc.jhu.edu.
Experience the glamour of old Hollywood at the Library of Congress on September 18th, when they'll host the 75th anniversary screening of Oscar-winning classic All About Eve, starring Bette Davis and Marilyn Monroe. The evening includes a special introduction to the film by library film preservation experts, as well as a curated display of library treasures, music, dancing, photo ops, and themed cocktails. Reserve free tickets to All About Eve at loc.gov/live.
For nearly 40 years, Food and Friends has delivered hope and health across the D.C. region with home-delivered, medically tailored meals for neighbors living with serious illnesses like HIV/AIDS, diabetes, cancer, and more. This October, you can be part of that mission by joining Move for Meals, a month-long fitness and fundraising challenge. Walk, run, or bike wherever you are. Track your time exercising via the fitness app Strava and raise funds for neighbors in need. Every $10 you raise provides one medically tailored meal, ensuring that more people facing serious illnesses receive the nutrition that they need to heal. Help us reach our goal of 20,000 meals. Sign up today at p2p.onecause.com/moveformeals or visit foodandfriends.org and help us deliver hope and health one meal at a time. Make the case for me. Like, why is being part of Maryland better than being its own state?
Well, first off, I want to state that the notion that we are special is not necessarily a good thing. We're disenfranchised. The only way that Washingtonians have ever regained our enfranchisement or access to Article 1 of the Constitution is through the process of retrocession. So it's historically significant. Secondly, in the economics of it, the District of Columbia has carve-outs and special things from the federal government that we're going to lose one way or another. We could have less state government and therefore have more economies of scale. So, for example, we are going to lose, if we're the 51st state or Douglas County or Douglas City, Maryland, we're going to lose the 70-30 Medicaid match, which is a carve-out we got. We should be getting that at 50-50 on Medicaid. We're going to lose the fact that our judicial system is paid for, or 85% of it's paid for. We're going to lose DC tag, but we're going to pick up in-state tuition. This is a complicated merger, but economically, 90% of the agencies of the, I think there's like 90 DC agencies within the DC government. Most of those agencies, let's say 2/3, are doing things that states do, not what cities do. So if you don't have to do things that states do, you don't have to pay as much taxes. You don't have to do as much stuff.
Right. So the argument, I guess, is that DC on its own, through no fault of its own, might be kind of a lousy state. And wouldn't you rather be part of something that has like a big state university system and that already has a prison system so that prisoners can be housed close to home and things like that?
Well, yeah, we are a bloated space in terms of our economics. I mean, our economy divided by our population is astronomical, and our government size, the amount of money we put in for our government for local and state control, which is not federal, or for our federal taxes, is just beyond belief. If you lived in a city like Denver, which is similar size, you wouldn't pay as much for your running your city like we do, or your state. The cost of your state and city taxes for your Denver, which is a liberal place, it's also a capital, would be a lot less than DC, like half as much.
What about UDC? Is the idea that that would become part of the University of Maryland system, which would have a flagship, and UDC would be one of the branches?
Absolutely. I mean, I've always thought that UDC could become like Montgomery College. My son went to Montgomery College for 2 years. At this point, I lived in Maryland. Then he went on to a major university after that. But you could go to UDC for 2 years, and then you could go to Maryland. Or you could go to UDC the whole time. So why not? Maryland Eastern Shore, UDC, why not be part of, as far as I'm concerned, the University of Maryland system is a pretty good system compared to a lot of other state systems. So I would think that being part of the University of Maryland system would be a benefit to Washingtonians, to students.
Let's talk about the minuses that people bring up, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on them. One of them is it's an identity. We are Washingtonians. We have been Washingtonians. And the idea of subsuming into another state, I mean, it's sort of like if New Jersey had to join New York, that there's just something that sits wrong with people. What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, our identity is that we're disenfranchised. If you live in Pittsburgh, do you have to root for the Eagles? You can root for the Steelers. I'm not going to root for the Baltimore Orioles. Okay? I'm not. I'm going to root for the Washington Nationals. My identity is not changed. It's enhanced.
There's another reason why mergers often don't happen, whether it's between countries or states or anything, which is that there's a lot of vested interests who are doing okay with the status quo, not always for ideological reasons. Like you mentioned, the government. There are a lot of employees in the district who do things that are state functions, not city functions. Would these people all lose their jobs? Because there's a lot of them. I think a lot of them are probably Maryland residents, but there are a lot of them. Would they lose their jobs, or would they just sort of start commuting to Annapolis instead?
There still would be stuff to do in the city, right? Would DC lose some people that work for DC DMV? Yeah, because we'd be able to be part of Maryland DMV.
Wait, would we have to have Maryland tags on our cars?
I think so.
Oh, man.
We could try to get a carve out or get a special tag. We could get a special tag that says Douglas County or something, or some type of way to make it look more Washingtonian. But we can advocate until we're blue in the face for 51st statehood and have a right to complain, or we can fix the problem.
Your contention is that taxes would go down for DC residents. Is that correct?
Well, Maryland's a very expensive place. DC is a very expensive place. I would certainly hope that if there was a merger, that the two would find ways to work together and make economies of scale that could actually benefit the taxpayer. I think that less is more often when it comes to government. But DC is a very liberal place. Maryland has one Republican person in the House of Representatives, but it's pretty liberal. I think it's like-minded people for the most part. Sure, there are parts of Western Maryland or parts of Eastern Maryland that might be more conservative. But can't we all just get along? I mean, we need to fix this.
So, one thing DC can't do, because we're disenfranchised, is levy commuter taxes. Now, if we were part of Maryland, the city government of Washington could, I think, levy a tax on commuters coming into the city, which I would imagine that people in both the Maryland and Virginia suburbs would not like.
Well, that's true. They might not like it, but if you live in Maryland or Virginia, and our population, particularly now that we're trying to go back to the office, increases during the day, and you wear out the streets, then maybe you should contribute somewhat. Or maybe and there should be reciprocity. So like right now, where I'm sitting right now in an office building in Tyson's Corner, Virginia, there would be reciprocity so that it would work both ways.
No, I agree with you, but the question I was going to come to is getting this done in Maryland, because Maryland would presumably have to agree to this.
Well, I think that I'm very glad that Jamie Raskin is somebody who is starting to talk about it more openly. And I think that the benefits for Maryland are significant. It would be great to have basically the confines of the capital of the country within your state. It would be great to have DC's economy, which is enormous, within your state. Our wealth is huge within your state. So Maryland should look at this as if you are a governor of Maryland, growing your population and growing your economy are usually things that you want to do. So go for it.
Absolutely. But in the real world, like in state legislatures and stuff, there are going to be people who say, well, if we add DC with all of its population and its money and its elected officials, I might lose some of my personal juice. Do you anticipate that being part of the political goings on about retrocession?
Of course. I mean, there is a Baltimore contingent that was very powerful, or is very powerful in the state of Maryland. It is less powerful now. There's more power really in the DC suburbs than there is around Baltimore these days. But historically, Baltimore is the center of mass of politics in the state of Maryland. So sure, but that's just like any state. There's the Alexandria, and then there's Richmond. There's always going to be back and forth.
I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you anticipate that this would be a thing that could actually successfully be sold to the citizens of Maryland?
Yeah, it requires leadership. But it requires us to ask first. The people in Maryland and politicians in Maryland will be deferential. They will defer to DC. DC has to defer. It has to ask. If Jamie Raskin's on the floor of the House of Representatives talking about a 51st statehood bill many years ago, he says it's up to DC to ask to fall back. He's absolutely correct. Back in the 1840s, the Virginia Washingtonians asked to fall back. It's up to us to look in the mirror first.
So I was struck that Jamie Raskin, who is a longtime, way before he was in politics, statehood advocate, would broach this subject, because it's a sort of a taboo among some of the activist community.
Well, it should not be a taboo.
Whether or not it shouldn't, but do you read anything significant into him even broaching the subject?
Yeah. I mean, the conditions have become so bad for our disenfranchisement. Our lack of self-determination is so bad now that you have to recognize our condition. It's more in our face than ever. But he is deferential. Like I said, Marylanders are deferential to, and he's part of the civil rights establishment. He used to work with Jesse Jackson. Eleanor Holmes Norton has been a very influential person on the Hill. So he doesn't want to encroach upon people's sensibilities, but at the same time, he's never been opposed to retrocession. He's just been more about being part of the Democratic establishment and being rah-rah for the 51st statehood, which would also create 2 more senators, which is part of the reasons why it has no chance.
And the way he tried to thread the needle when we spoke was that he suggested DC could become part of Maryland now to weather the storm, but then maybe go back and become its own, separate from Maryland sometime later. Is that possible?
No, I think that's ridiculous. If you're going to start working on the merger and do the merger, you're not going to go back. This is an act of Congress. This is politics at the state level. It's at the politics at the national level. This is a rebirth of our democracy. This is a fundamental thing. There's 700,000 of us who don't have access to Article 1, but pay federal taxes and live in the confines of the capital of the country. This is not a temporary thing.
And I think that situation with the continuing resolution in Congress, a $1 billion hole in the city budget, has sort of focused people's attention.
I'm glad that it's focusing people's attention, but people's attention should be focused already. They should have been focused for generations. But the cult of personality that is 51st statehood and the advocacy of partisanship has superseded the logic here. Not just the logic, but has crowded out the passion.
David, thank you so much for being here.
I'm delighted to be here. I'd love to come back again if you'd ever like to talk about this. Thank you so much.
And that's all for today here on CityCast DC. Retrocession is controversial, to say the least. What do you think? Send this episode to your friends, chat about it, and then email us your opinions at dc.citycast.fm. We might even feature you in a future episode. And become a CityCast DC neighbor. We need your support more than ever right now. Go to membership.citycast.fm. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.